Thanks, as I said, for joining us. Let's start with challenges, if we can. Let's look at the biggest challenges of integrating AI into existing manufacturing processes. And a second part to that question, how can they be overcome? Fabien, I'll start with you on this one, please.
That sounds great. Thank you, Neil. So basically, when you think about implementing a new technology, it's all about how it's going to impact the people and the process. So technology being the enabler, you're going to have to really worry about, in order to make it successful, to communicate the why are we doing this, whether it's a grassroots, movement, or it's the executive aligning with an initiative. You're going to have to make sure that people understand the why. It's key to the success of the transformation, because if people cannot understand why they need to rally in adopting a new technology, it's going to be very difficult to have a successful implementation. So making sure that there's a program that is put in place with a clear alignment between the business strategy and then the data strategy, as well as the AI strategy, is going to really help you ensure and eliminate the hurdle. Because in an organization, you always will have some people who are resisting the change versus people who are adopting and pushing for an adoption. So I would say make sure that you have a program in place, and obviously with partners, be open to receive perspective from people from outside of your organization.
It's all about understanding the why. Scott, if we can come to you next.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously that's what Fabien just mentioned is probably the biggest hurdle because there's so many different needs, so many different expectations, so many different sort of challenges to overcome to convince the organization of what you want to do and how you want to do it. But if we look on the technical side of the house, there's also some very simple block and tackling that are significant challenges, not least of which is just the inherent siloedness of data that comes out of the entire manufacturing ecosystem. Whether we're talking about in the individual factory or across multiple factories or connecting the entire supply chain, the history here is that data is either non-existent or difficult to find, and certainly difficult to bring together and to create one sense of truth. So, focusing on those areas and using some of the newer tools that are out there and the newer techniques that are very specific to manufacturing data. So it's not just throw Snowflake on top of something and everything is working perfectly. You need a data aggregation strategy that can pull the best. You understand what that data is. You have to actually have equipment that can provide the data, whether that equipment is new and has some of those new sensors on there, or you're augmenting with IoT sensors today. But most importantly, getting it into one repository that's proper for time series data, like Google's offering that we use frequently, Google Manufacturing Data Engine.
Thank you, Scott. Helena.
Yeah, I would like to add to the discussion as well the concept of Industry 5. I mean, we have been, and at least in Germany or in Europe, it's a known term, the Industry 4 concept, which is running since, I would say, 2010. Meanwhile, we are entering the next stage of digital transformation. Yeah, so the transformation is by far not over, but it's really climbing another ladder, I would say. And Industry 5 takes into account, having the human in the center, and then, of course, technology being the enabler. And this is complemented by the sustainability or the limits of the planet on the one hand side, and that very strong human-centric on the other hand side. So I would agree absolutely with Scott and also with Fabien. Data is the homework we need to do. And we are conducting at CGI once per year our Voice of the Client analysis worldwide with CXOs around the industry verticals. And it is clear that they want to climb that insight and decision-making plateau. However, their endeavors, both in terms of data strategy and data management, are not there yet. So it means, and as unpopular as it seems, we need to do the homework first. So the building of the ground of the house and the walls, before then eventually we can go up to the crown and apply whatsoever machine learning or AI technologies.
Well, let's stay with the question of data there, as we've all picked out how critical that is. Scott, if I can start with you on this one, what advice would you have in terms of getting your data in line? I think the expression I used earlier was your data ducks in a row, if you'll forgive that horrendous expression, but you know what I mean. Where do you start? How can you get that in position to allow for all of the, I guess, more glamorous things that can follow?
Well, certainly, that the answer will be slightly different depending on where you are, right? But assessing exactly where you are is probably one of the most important first steps. What data exists today? What is coming off of the machines, of the supply line, of the manufacturing line, of the human interaction? How is that being collected? Are we still using checkboards and paper to write down, effects? How's that getting loaded into systems? So some analysis and inventory of what data we have, how quality it is, and where it is today needs to happen. From there, it's much more of, I would say, a standard process of saying, okay, what's the quality of that data? How do we start to bring that data together in some sort of standardized way? The typical sort of data aggregation, data integration strategy that anyone have. But I think what's unique here, in particular, when we're talking about AI, is also thinking about some of those other aspects around ethical AI, having a framework around what we collect, how we collect, because you could go very deep. You could say, I want to collect HR data to correlate, quality and efficiency on a supply line after the U.S. election. Are things going well today because people are up last night? You could really get kind of intrusive here. So having that framework in place, I think, is also important. And also, recognizing that at the end of the day, this is all data science. And, you must create some sort of semblance of a center of excellence around the skill sets necessary. But in general, it's really understanding what data do we have? What data do we need? How do I augment? How do I bring it all together and put it into one place to create that one version of the truth?
Helena, if I can come to you next on this one, please.
Yes, absolutely. So I think on the search towards the golden data records, I agree. It's a data zoo or ducks in a row that you were just mentioning, Neil. And the thing is, I think there's no one answer to that aspect. I mean, for example, if you look again into the ecosystems where you have under the European umbrella of Gaia X, you have the data sovereignty and the data standards. So I think data standards can help to a certain extent. At the moment, I think things are quite complex because imagine you are an automotive OEM and you have your tier N suppliers and everyone is, as Scott said, storing their data differently. Or even on your own shop floor, you might have production machinery that is quite old that you needed to enhance with the means of IoT devices to extract the data. Then it's about where do you store it, and then is how do you clean it and how do you prepare it for then later advanced algorithmics, right? And I personally would always start from the business process. So for me, the general question is a little bit like the why. So where am I? Am I in R&D? Am I in production? Am I in supply chain or in the aftermarket? Which kind of data is attached to that? And what are my internal factors and my contributors from the outside? And often what we see here, again, coming from our Voice of the Clients analysis, is that most of the clients, they have a strategy around data management within their organization. But as soon as they leave their premises, this strategy does not extend with their collaborators or their ecosystem. And this is another aspect I would like to add to it.
Fabian?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So adding to what Helena and Scott have mentioned, I'm going back to what I said earlier, which is starting with the business priority and the data foundation, you'll get to the AI strategy. And I like what Scott mentioned. Where do you start? So you have to really understand your current state and also your vision, where you want to go to define these steps to get your data in order. And also, I like what Helena mentioned, which is your team, who is going to access that data, who needs access and be able to take an action out of the data they're going to retrieve. In the end, this is what we do and what we worry about every day, to be able to give access and usefulness out of the data, out of the existing system. So that's the other thing, is that the data already exists for the most part. You can create a ubiquitous augmentation of what you already have. This is a word that one of my customers use, is that we have all these systems, whether they're an ERP system, an MES system, a PLM system. So these companies are really data rich. You just need to make it accessible and useful to the user. And in the end, Google Cloud is a data cloud, and it's an open platform, but also it's not all about cloud. In manufacturing, you're going to have to leverage the edge. Edge computing is going to be essential to the success of using AI at the edge. Scott and I have really worked hard to give some real life example here, where I live in Chicago, where we build an innovation hub where people can come see these type of live demo. And it's, all about who's going to access the data, why do they need it, is it going to serve their customer, and then understanding, like Scott mentioned, the current state of their starting point. So,
and I'll give a shameless plug really quick too, that if you do come to that center, not only do you get to experience all of these things in real time, but you get a really fun keychain that will manufacture for you right on the spot. So we encourage you to come visit us.
I'll allow the odd shameless plug. That's absolutely fine, Scott, not a problem. Where I want to go next, though, is dig into some case studies and examples. So just on this panel here, it scares me to think about how many great examples you will have all seen between you of AI being used particularly well in a manufacturing operation to significantly improve things, to really move the needle. Elena, if I can start with you, would you like to sort of pick out one example of that's really genuinely impressed and excited you?
Sure. So, I mean, there are a lot of interesting examples, and they are a little bit, like a pearl chain, on a timeline, because when we start some 10 years back, we had the first, predictive analytics around predictive maintenance on the shop floor. These were really the first wow or aha moments where we could predict with a certain percentage, looking into the future, when a production machinery or an engine will fail. Then it developed a little bit. We even were able, to determine the root cause. Was it the environmental temperature? Was it the humidity? So what was the root cause for the failure? And then as time went by, of course, you could interconnect that with what kind of spare parts do I need to fix it? What kind of a service technician, AK, competencies do I need to do that? So that was the first one. Then followed by, I would say, predictive quality analytics, a really big one. Quality assurance, that was the logical consequence out of that maintenance aspect. And then, of course, I would say when generative AI hit us 2 years ago, my personal favor, and also taking into account the economical slowdown or a little bit economical crisis that we are currently in, manufacturers are trying to diversify, and they're trying to come up with new product lines and go to new geographies. Hence, they need to reduce their product development cycles. And the more complex a product gets, take an aircraft, take a ship, it's huge development R&D cycles, right? So if you have the possibility with the help of Gen AI to reduce them a little bit, I mean, that's quite a use case, right?
Absolutely. Fabienne, if I can come to you next, please.
Yes, so we have, all over, whether it's the process industry or the discrete industry, there are multiple examples of what company can do, and we have some that are very public, like Renault in France, the French automaker, using, a lot of this technology that we're talking about in the supply chain, as well as the manufacturing operations, making some really significant improvements, as well as American automaker like Ford and others across the world like Toyota, using it to improve the customer experience, whether it's in the vehicle or how to access manual operator digitally instead of having a manual in the glove compartment. There is Tyson Food here in the US doing a lot of work around their data analytics from, basically the ubiquitous augmentation of the existing system. And the reason you can start there, and it's pretty straightforward, where the system of records are actually pretty rigid. So if you can, augment them by using GenAI, like Elena was mentioning, you're going to make this data very much accessible and useful, just like the way we are used to find the information that we need on a personal level. When we use Google search, YouTube, and Map, you retrieve your information that you need to take an action very quickly. So a lot of examples, some of them are very public. You can find them online, and we're happy to discuss about those further. But Scott, I'll let you add to it.
Well, yeah, I definitely, want to say, I think, Elena, you mentioned it very, very well. There's sort of an evolution that we've seen. But that being said, there are plenty of organizations that can benefit from the predictive maintenance aspect. So we're not even 25% there with implementing those things across the majority of use cases. So I think there's a tremendous amount of open opportunity, and that's what we're doing. We're doing in many different companies right now. But I'll mention two things. One, I think the strategy of thinking big but acting small works really well, especially to take first steps into these types of things. We have packaged solutions that make incremental steps towards that brighter future, that more interconnected future where you're really driving very significant outcome. But you can still get great value out of, just a predictive, maintenance component in of itself. But some of the stuff that we're really working on now that I think is super interesting is, for instance, we'll have visual inspection to look at defect and quality. And now we can very accurately predict and say, oh, we found these issues. But by connecting subsystems backwards, the next question is, well, why? Why are we seeing this increase, right? And then if we connect the next system back, we can start to say, with generative AI, we can consider that entire system as an entity. And we can actually talk to that entity and start to discover, well, what could we do that would change this outcome? And actually literally have it as if you're talking to a person, but in this case, it's generative AI supporting an overarching system. Now, of course, there's a little bit of futuristic pipe dream in there, but it's less futuristic than I think many people realize right now. And certainly where we're going when we talk about a really, truly interconnected smart factory. So those types of use cases, I think we're going to see, really advance over the next 18 months. And we're going to see incredible results coming from it.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important aspect because, transformation in the baby steps was we are doing here a proof of concept and there a proof of concept. And meanwhile, I think we are all accepting the matter of fact that we need an enterprise-wide transformation. And so it's having the big picture and then continuously following them on the way to become a data-driven manufacturer. And when that turns into the different layers of an entity, we call that, for example, the digital triplet, because then you have the kind of intelligence on top of a digital twin where it really starts getting interesting in scenario planning and such. So that's a cool aspect.
Yeah, so I like these comments. I want to add to this. It's really important that people understand that there is already a lot of impact generated by this technology. And what you just mentioned, the digital triplet, or it's actually a true digital thread, between this system, and the correlation of the data that Scott just mentioned is really important because, yes, you might see that there's with visual inspection, I would say visual intelligence, you can detect a defect, but explaining the why and correlating to upstream to all the supply chain data is going to be very important. So this is why, again, being able to access the data from this disparate system, making sense of it in a natural language is going to really be helpful for the organization.
Absolutely, and I love that expression you used a moment ago, Scott, about thinking big but starting small. It says it beautifully. Let's move on to the workforce and the human aspect of AI within manufacturing, because I can't remember who it was, I do apologise, but someone gave me this wonderful analogy about AI being introduced into any kind of business. It's almost like the first film in a new superhero franchise, the first one where they've got all these powers but have got no idea how to use them. But by the end, they get the cape and everything's fine. How important is the AI adoption amongst the workforce whether it's skills gaps, strategies to make sure it's being implemented properly. Fabian, if I can start with you, how critical is that part to make sure we maximize the effectiveness?
Yes, so it's going back to, working with your team, understanding what do they need, what are the hurdles that they are facing, how can you improve the customer experience, meaning the internal customer, in this case, the employee. So the biggest problem that typically you see in a manufacturing setting is that the people need access to all these disparate systems. So they'll do the work, they'll make it happen, they'll work on the weekend, but what happens is like they have to access multiple systems and take many steps, and it takes time, and sometimes people make error. And the reason is because it's not easily accessible and useful. So if you start with, the hurdle, what challenge are they facing? Can you remove some of these steps? Can you ensure that you can automate some of the things that are very manual? Scott mentioned paper earlier in a shop floor. You still see that a lot, where you have manual operations, where it takes time to train a new employee to work at a workstation, to use a new equipment, because all of that information is very difficult to access, and the training is no longer the type of training developed throughout the years by this company. Is never used that technology that the people are used to in their personal life. So think about YouTube Short. It's amazing how to see the new generation being able to access data that they need very quickly and be done after a minute, 30 seconds. So if you can capture the tribal knowledge of a seasoned worker that's getting ready to retire and take that unstructured data from audio and video with multimodal capability from our GenAI, you're going to be able to synthesize and summarize and make that data accessible and useful to the new employee. So now your ramp-up time for training is a lot shorter. You gain flexibility and agility and speed to meet your customers, in this case, the external customer expectation.
Scott, if we can come to you next, please.
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit earlier, some aspects that are more general, the general need around data governance, data stewardship, enhancing that area of the organization, because all of this obviously falls under that, and then layering in the ethical AI frameworks and whatnot, and then having a core data science team. But but those are almost the must-haves and relatively obvious. I think what I'm very passionate about, and GFT is very passionate about, is also considering the implementation when some AI system, tool, capability is implemented, what is necessary for the folks on the factory floor, right? And the goal is, for at least for our stated goal, is to make the AI be considered a coworker, right? If you can get to that level where there is no specific or super detailed training necessary for the people who are working on the floor to leverage this, because it's acting like another trusted employee. It's a teammate, on that assembly line, on that factory floor, and any step of that. That's the ultimate goal. And I think with a lot of the tools and techniques that we have now, we're proving that can actually be the case. Of course, there's some training to understand there's a slight difference in the process flow, but it shouldn't be that you're training a welder on how to leverage AI properly in order to do your job. It should just be, hey, I've got this thing that's helping me do my job, right? And there's nuance to that, but at the end of the day, if we can accomplish that, and I think we can, and we are now, then that's really that's the ultimate goal of where we need to go when we talk about reskilling.
Elena?
I would like to take into account maybe 4 columns. So when it's about the human aspect, responsible and ethical AI was just mentioned. So risk mitigation, what around privacy, what around IP rights, what about security, what about biases? Just some key and buzzwords under the big umbrella of risk mitigation. So first column. Responsible use of AI. Yeah, how do we implement that? For us as systems integrator, this is very important and it's effectively crucial. Yeah, how do we ensure that the implementation is robust, it's trustworthy, it's ethical? So that is let me say, the column of responsible and ethical AI. The second is the leadership column, I would say. So in which kind of organization are we? And in the manufacturing industry, we have quite a conservative setting. And of course, also from the leadership perspective, you need to entrust and enable the people that they are curious to learn, that they are willing to learn. You need to give them targets towards they can work to. So reward being data literate. That does not necessarily mean that all of us have to become data scientists, not at all, but to understand the value of data as a product or as a service. I think that's the first step. And of course, becoming data-driven is not a one-time effort or a one-time project. It's a process, right? And you need all hands on deck. You need all of the C-levels that are accompanying that change. IT and OT convergence, the matter of fact that IT often does not talk to the business or they're even enemies. This is something that we need to reduce also for the proper implementation of AI and bringing also the human being to the center. So that's the leadership component, that's the organizational component about shared targets. And at the end of the day, it's a big change management program. Yeah. So this is my 50 cents.
As you say, it is. There are so many different aspects to it, and you've covered those off beautifully. Let's talk about competitiveness, because for all of you, how can manufacturers really use AI and similar technologies to gain an edge, gain that competitive advantage that everyone wants, whether that's nationally, globally, or whatever? How critical is it that you embrace this technology to maintain that competitive edge? Scott, if I can start with you, please.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was just at a conference last week. It was a conference focused in private capital space, private equity, venture capital, things of that nature. And I'll mention something that was said many times, actually. But in one, it was a keynote that really resonated with me. They said, you can not spend too much on data and AI, but you can definitely spend too little. So, from that perspective, I think that and that's the investment community, right? Talking about these things. Now, of course, there's a tremendous amount of hype around that, and valuations are moving all over the place and whatnot. But I think there's a general recognition here that if you're not doing this, your competitors will, and inevitably they will be able to do better, faster, cheaper, and faster time to market, for new or innovative products. And again, this can be an eye-rolling type of statement because it's something that we've heard on many different technological trends over the years. But the reality is things are moving much, much faster now than they ever were before. So at the end of the day, understanding what we have, augmenting, and then trying to derive that next level of insight to create either the faster, the better, the cheaper, the safer, are all absolutely critical. And folks will rise to the top there and will have significant competitive advantage, whether we're talking about manufacturing a car or a desk or a pencil. I mean, it really comes down to that level. When you talk about specifics associated with that, it's very driven by the organization that we're talking about, the industry that they're in. But inevitably, this will be the most significant differentiator over the next 3 to 5 years for sure.
It is the production line of the new revolution, I suppose. Elena, if I can come to you next on that importance of competitiveness and having that edge.
Yeah, definitely. And it gains even more of importance when you look at the WHO criteria, the macro trends that every one of us is following year over year. And you have, for example, the fragility of the supply chains, and all of your suppliers that are included. So how agile is your supply chain, and how easy can you switch from one to the other? And AI, of course, can help you in that supply chain domain tremendously. So that is one aspect I would definitely mention. Attached also to warehousing, if we can predict 15, 20 days in advance when a warehouse goes empty, and then trigger back the capacity and the production at the beginning of the process, of course, that makes you data driven, and it makes you act in real time, and it makes you be proactive instead of reactive. So that is for sure one, I would say, competitive edge. The other thing where I see a tremendous advantages or potential is in the sector of R&D, for sure, when it comes about helping or being accompanied by AI, coming up with new product ideas, product types, that whole prototyping, ideation thing. I think that gets really a competitive edge through the area of AI, and many more, of course.
Fabien?
So competitiveness, I'm going to relate that to, it's going to help the customer increase their market share, or increase their sales, or increase their profit. And if you look at the past 20 years, because today we're in the very early stage of AI and Gen AI, but if you look at what's been happening over the past 20 years, like Elena mentioned, Industry 4.0, you've seen a lot of legacy companies who were building hardware transform into software company by adding a lot of, data as a service on top of their product. See what's happening to the automobile industry. It's becoming a connected experience in the car. So it's really about mobility and no longer about the piece of hardware. I was with a OEM in London recently where we were talking about the experience of the customer when they're using the actual product. So if you think about this is Andreessen Horowitz who were saying, software will eat hardware for breakfast anytime. But this is exactly what happened. And then if you look at the S&P 500, you have more and more digital native company as opposed to legacy company. So you see all that transformation is all about competitiveness. So whoever is adopting this technology is really transforming their business and the way they sell. Often, when you used to sell a piece of hardware, it was all about the capability of that piece of hardware. It can go this fast at this speed, but now it's all about, are you meeting sustainability goal that the consumer wants to see? So it's changing the dynamic of selling and indeed the competitiveness of this company. So it's like, do you meet the customer's expectation? And do you understand those?
A very good point. Scott mentioned hype a moment ago, and to have the three of you and your level of expertise on this panel, it'd be, again, remiss of me not to go into this. There are so many solutions, toys, great ideas out there in the marketplace. It's messy. Barely a day goes by, or an hour and a day goes by that I don't get another email coming through my inbox promising to solve all the world's problems with one AI tool. From all of your collective experience, what advice would you have for manufacturers out there? They're getting presented by so many options, so many ideas. Fabien's desperate to jump in on this. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll go back to what Elena said earlier. There's a lot of POC going on. Why? It's because it's related to what I just said. That's why I was excited about the question, Neil. I just told you that all these hardware companies are becoming software or trying to provide data as a service. Well, that leads to this problem where you have this OEM providing AI solution for his equipment. And then another one that you're using in the factory providing the same thing. So now you end up with 50 different predictive AI solutions that don't talk to each other. So you're really not solving the problem. So what you have to be very careful is choosing the partner that you're going to collaborate with to be open. So if you are enabling that those plants that you have, regardless of the type of equipment that they have on the shop floor, to be able to do a predictive maintenance, but it's a standard predictive maintenance across the plant. worldwide, regardless if they're using Siemens PLC or Rockwell or Allen Bradley, or if they're working with a specific packaging machine equipment. Then that's going to eliminate all that noise that you just referred to. And then you will avoid failure by doing 50 POC on the same thing at the same time in 50 different locations. So you implement a standard way of looking at things and using AI to deploy a successful outcome for these plant manager in this case. So very important. Yeah, be careful who you choose to partner with.
Yeah, I love it when a guest is so keen to answer a question. They've almost virtually put their hand up. So Fabienne, thank you very much indeed for that. Scott, if I can come to you next on that.
Well, as a partner, I'm thrilled that Fabienne says this as well. So it's very helpful for us. But I mean, that is in fact what we're trying to execute on with Google. But I'll go back to my original statement, which is, think big but act small. So it's very, thinking, discussing the art of the possible, looking at what could be over some relatively reasonable period of time, and really articulating that full journey across whatever that is. If you want to connect within the factory floor, outside of the factory floor, into your supply chain, whatever the case may be, understanding that, journeying that thing out, but then just acting small and making sure at each act that you are maintaining the vision, right? So that you don't become now siloed AI on top of siloed data. That will be the ruin of this particular piece. So, there's many other strategies, but in general, that's the thing. And I think, to Fabienne's point, using partners that can come in and provide that sort of different set of eyes. They understand your market generally, but can look at it with a different, fresh set of eyes to help with that art of the possible and recommend some of those point pieces, which, by the way, don't have to be linear, but inevitably they have to connect. If they don't connect, we've missed out on the larger piece, and that's what we really focus in on.
The idea of siloed AI on top of siloed data, I can almost feel a collective shudder down the spines of our audience there. So thank you for that, Scott. Elena, I'll give you the final word on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, that tackles my smile, because go to a good independent systems integrator of choice, I would say, because these guys can help you really in not only assessing the right tool landscape, but they can also help you join industry ecosystems. So to my point, or to my keynote this morning, think about Catena X, think about the best practices that these guys in these collaborative ecosystems have already worked out. So you don't have to start from scratch. You profit from a lot of experience and best practices out in the market, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? And when it comes about really a good tool selection, again, I would say it's a future architecture that you need to take into account. Both Scott and Fabienne have touched on that. So if you have 30 worldwide factories, of course, you need to design a solution that fits all of them. And then you need to plug in the solutions that are capable of interoperability and that make you happy on the long run, also financially in your CapEx and OpEx. So that would be my input here.
And it's as simple as that. And I'm afraid we are up on time, everyone. We've covered off a huge amount of ground over the last sort of 40, 45 minutes or so. But we are going to have to wrap things there. So a huge thank you, Helena Jochberger, Vice President, Global Lead Manufacturing at CGI, Scott Hoffman, Chief Revenue Officer at GFT, and also Fabienne Deboeuf, Industry Manager, Manufacturing at Google Cloud. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us at Manufacturing and Mobility Live.
Thank you for a great discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. And remind me.